it is dependent on how much money the government puts in. It is also dependent on how many students Singapore has. As you know, the number of primary and secondary school students in Singapore are shrinking due to limited birth rates, to the point that some schools have to merge in certain neighborhoods. And although your student numbers are stable or reducing, some of the recurrent costs cannot be reduced. Certain costs like utilities and manpower may have to be paid even though you are catering to a smaller student size. So if recurrent expenditure remains about stable, but student population is falling or shrinking, then this value will also increase by ratio. In recent years, you can see that the government is trying to experiment or explore more new directions in the area of education. So here are some newer directions mentioned. The government is replacing streaming with subject-based spending. Yeah, so I will not say too much because some of you are doing this for the assignment. You can read about it if you're interested. As a student myself, I have gone through streaming before and subject-based spending before. So both have pros and cons. We shall give time to the government to see whether subject-based spending actually helps and works the way desired. The government is also diversifying secondary education and pre-university education pathways. Now you are not just having your conventional GCE levels and O-levels track. Students can choose to pursue integrated program, international baccalaureate program, go sports school, go art school, etc. The government is introducing more and more public and university and private universities in Singapore. So to date, there are 6 autonomous public universities in Singapore. The 6 are mentioned here. The 6 is a substantial number, given that Singapore has a small population, and there are also other private institutions providing university programs. The government is also adding development tracks for polytechnic graduates. In particular, SIT and SUSS are specifically catered to polytechnic graduates. Apart from pursuing further studies in universities, polytechnic graduates can also choose to do other things like taking specialist diploma, choosing work and study programs, etc. And in relation, the government tries to expand internship and work study programs as well as apprenticeship programs. The government tries to copy the model of Switzerland and Germany when it comes to apprenticeship. There is also active effort to rebrand the image of vocational education for the past 10 to 20 years. When we say vocational education here, we are referring to ITE education. So education from the Institutes of Technical Education. There is this urge to rebrand the image because all along there have been some certain negative stereotypes on people taking vocational education. So the government wanted to rebrand the image of vocational education and change this stereotype. The government tries to portray that everyone has different pace and preference in learning. Vocational education is just one of the ways to cater to this diversity of people. So no matter where and how you start off, you can still reach the end point and destination if you put in effort, even if your journey is different from others. Consequently, the government pumped in a lot of money to improve the infrastructure of the ITE institutions. If you realize many of the facilities are even better and nicer than those in the universities, even our LT. Then the government also starts to advocate a lot of new slogans like those mentioned here. If these are the slogans to tell you what you should do in future, does it tell us that these are what we have not done in the past? So what do they reflect about previous paths taken? Do they reflect what we have done and what we have failed to do? Think about it. Now we move on to the aspect of continual skill enhancement beyond pre-employment education. So meaning that you try to build a skill, to try to go training after you graduate from the conventional school education during your work life. I do not like to use the word upgrading because this is not correct English. You can upgrade software, you can upgrade plane seats, you cannot upgrade ourselves. You can enhance your skills and improve your skills. It is a never-ending quest to sustain employability. Workforce must stay relevant in the dynamic economy. Nowadays, there is more intense competition, there is constant economic restructuring, there are fast changes in technology and business approaches. So skills can become obsolete if they are not continuously refreshed, adjusted, and expanded. Pre-employment education no longer lasts a lifetime. As a result, the government developed this master plan and subsequently updated this master plan to develop competitive workforce. The aims of the master plans are as such. So do you think that these aims have been achieved since 2020 has just gone past not long ago? So you may want to look back at all the data to get a sense of the success of Singapore's master plan in CT. In order to implement a more formalized way to train manpower, WSQ was created for this purpose. It tries to accredit people who have taken certain training for certain areas. Competency frameworks copied from Australia are developed to support this WSQ system. Competency frameworks are, how should I say? Competency frameworks are meant to categorize and systemize competencies required by an industry. Then you will try to train people and accredit people who have taken training for these specific competencies. Therefore, one competency framework fits one industry. These are some illustration on how these competency frameworks operate. So typically for a competency framework, we will identify the competencies applicable to one industry. We will identify or list down, we will classify them. Then we will determine which jobs need which competencies. Then courses will be developed to cater to competencies relevant to the jobs. So for example, if I am taking job A, or I want to apply for job A, but I feel that my skills are not sufficient, perhaps I may want to take courses that cover competencies relevant to job A, 1, 2, 3. With this implementation of WSQ and a more formalized way to do training and accreditation, Singapore saw a big increase in all sorts of academies being created for various industries. So you hear of BCA Academy, IP Academy, LTA Academy, ASFI Academy, and so on and so forth. Extra financial support was given to older and poorer workers to attend training because these are the people who need training the most, but they may have the least means to attend training. So you want to help them up to move up the ladder, extra support for students. In 2017, the government launched this initiative called Industry Transformation Maps, whereby you have certain development maps for specific industries. With that, you have competency frameworks being renamed and repackaged into skills frameworks so that each skills framework can fit one map. They are rehashed, they are renamed, they are repackaged, but the essence are not changed. With the active government promotion and messaging on upgrading, there has been a fever in attending training, taking courses, and obtaining certificates since early 2000s. This brought along a boom in private education sector as well. Yeah, so once upon a time, the private education sector in Singapore was booming because it's highly lucrative, everyone rushing to study something. It also sort of worsened the paper chase culture in Singapore, which overemphasized on courses and certificates more than actual skills obtained. With the boom in private sector, private education sector, there have been uneven capabilities and qualities of education providers. Some providers are decent in standards, but some providers are weak in curriculum and facilities, and they just want to issue certificate paper. So to address this issue, the government tried to create a regulatory entity called CPE to regulate this sector. The intensification of paper chase culture also led to another issue of inflating expectations of people. So people may have much more expectations beyond what is realistic. Some people may think that once I go and take some course and take some certificate, I can have salary increment, I can have job promotion. But this may not be the case in reality. Why is this so? You may have that certificate, but the boss feels that you do not have the supposed relevant skills. You do not have the skills imparted by the course. Why you do not have the skills? Maybe because you never truly bothered to learn, and you just complete the course in a slacker way, or you choose a simple course to get certificate easily. Another reason may be that if you take that certificate, you have solid skills from the certificate, but unfortunately, the specific skills that you have obtained may not be so relevant to the specific jobs or the specific companies that you are serving. So it is harder for the bosses to justify to give you some salary increment or job promotion when what you learn and what is needed by them do not match that well. Then another reason may be that you have the certificate, you have solid skills, and the solid skills are relevant, but you have never been a performer at the workplace. You are always slipshod, irresponsible, selfish, unpunctual, etc. So if the boss just gives you a salary increment or job promotion based on the certificate, it is harmful to the organization and it is unfair to other better performing colleagues. Another question to ask is whether there may be a potential glut of degree holders, whether you may have too much degree holders in the country. If there is a glut of degree holders, there may be overqualified manpower, there may be underemployed manpower, there may be skewed expectations of people. In fact, this potential problem can be seen in a number of places in Asia like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. Singapore may become the next one in line. However, personally, I feel that it is okay for Singapore to have more university graduates, provided that people have the correct mindset and expectations. It is fine if people view that university education is a common entry level, and it is an additional avenue to learn more, rather than being an ultimate tool to raise up the sky. Whatever the case, you can have more university graduates, but you cannot lower the standard to make it easier to get university degree, because you are just deluding yourself. This will cause the prevention of sufficiently skilled manpower being developed. It will also cause imbalance in people's mindset. Therefore, in relation, a question always asked by people is that whether the intrinsic versatilities and right skills are sufficiently gained through all this process of upgrading and training. Ultimately, many issues related to paper chase culture and training relevance boils down to how HR is managed, more than how education is managed. Some people do not get their due reward and progression, even though they are capable, they are diligent, they are ambitious, just because they may lack that paper certificate, or because the company does not have a good system to detect their abilities and plan their progress. So in order to fit the preference of the trend, everyone just go and take some paper for somewhere, somehow, just to fit the overall phenomenon. This is a HR problem. This is not an education problem. So ultimately, when you go into HR management, the organizations and the management should give due credit and progression to those who perform and who have higher potential for higher level roles. Certification may be one of the measures, it shouldn't be the only measure. The next part on this topic will be another issue on seasonal industry targeting. Seasonal industry targeting also creates challenge and fatigue in manpower development in Singapore. What do you mean by seasonal industry targeting? So as I said just now, the government likes to guess world trends. So the government likes to guess what the world prefers, and then the government will try to develop sectors based on those preferences. These sectors targeted are seasonal because it can change with time. The world preferences guessed by the government may change every few years, so the sectors targeted by the government may also change every few years. How would the government typically develop manpower for a particular new sector? Whenever the government decides to go into this sector, it will have the willpower to push it through, even if it means to start from scratch. So the government may identify that this is a trendy sector, like sector A. So the government will have to start this sector A from scratch. Since this is a new sector of new ground, there will not be enough manpower in Singapore relevant to this sector. Therefore, you have to find manpower somewhere. The government likes fast results, so the government wants to set up the sector fast. In order to fill the manpower gap fast, the obvious immediate solution is to import foreign manpower from elsewhere. So the first step is to import foreign manpower relevant to that sector. Then in the meanwhile, the government will try to publicize the sector in Singapore and develop training in Singapore for locals, like programs in polytechnics, universities, and other institutions. The sectors targeted by the government now are quite sophisticated. So it may be things like aerospace, biomedical, clean tech, cybersecurity, etc. These sectors need very skilled manpower, so it takes time to develop local manpower. It takes about 3-4 years to produce polytechnic and university graduates. If you need PhD and master graduates, you need additional 5-6 years above that 3-4 years. And this is just years required for education. We are not counting the years required to get some actual real work experience. Then, after the manpower has been developed, but to an extent, the government may change the sector targeted because of the new change in world trends. And this implies that the government has to go through that tedious cycle of manpower search and manpower development from time to time, again and again. This also implies that many people who choose to take the course under the impression that the course is meant for a very supposedly hot topic called Sector A, these people may realize that Sector A is not that hot anymore by the time they graduate or they start work for a short while. So they may have more difficulty finding jobs in Sector A because too many people flooded into that sector, and Sector A is no longer taking that much limelight. I've personally seen this many times as a student and a working adult. Every time the government announced that, oh, this new sector we targeted, I can tell you the enrollment for the related majors will suddenly increase in explosive manner for the next immediate semester. And then the enrollment for the originally popular majors suddenly dropped like flies. So this semester, everyone is crowding in this faculty. Next semester, everyone crowding at another faculty. Crazy people. When you have this unhealthy norm, you may create this phenomenon of oversupply of unsuitable people in the job market, in the labor market. Why is this so? Many of the people who studied those related majors, they did it because that is what their government or their parents or their media told them. This is the next big thing, so everyone charge and take up that major. Although they may have no knack and no feel for the subject. No knack and feel means that you do not have the capability and you do not have the interest in the subject. When you do not have the knack for the subject, your academic results will be quite average or even borderline. You cannot catch the deep essence of the subject. When you do not have the feel for the subject, you do not enjoy the course. You will not venture beyond what is taught in class on your own. You will just rely on what lecturers give you. And it is harder for you to find a job in the not so hot now Sector A if you do not have this competence and passion. Especially when you have more competition from fellow graduates and there are limited places, limited jobs in that sector. Computing field is not for everyone. Sustainability and agriculture fields are not for everyone. You really need to know what suits you and what fits you. Besides, these people have a higher tendency to develop anger because they feel cheated and shortchanged by the government for siding them to take the course that are not so useful now. Instead of reflecting on their personal deficiencies and personal decisions. When they have this limited ability and they have this negative mindset, it is harder for them to be open and willing to move to other job options and to prepare themselves for other job opportunities. Before I end off this slide, I just have some preaching to do at the bottom. It says here that schooling does not necessarily equate to learning. Certification does not necessarily equate to ability. When you do training now, the main aim should be to learn something rather than to collect certificates. Nowadays, you can flash 2 or 3 certificates. Other people can flash 4 or 5 easily. So what you know and you learn is more important than how many pieces of paper that you have. Skills can be developed from work exposure, private pursuits, life experience, etc. So please do not constrain your mind that learning must be related to your major and learning must come from the school. Knowledge, skills, perspectives, and networks from various avenues shall stay with you forever and form a more complete, especially with things getting more interrelated and multidisciplinary now. Whatever you learn and know will be handy somehow, some way, sometime, directly or indirectly. This is something that I truly experienced myself, so it's not just a cliche. I've tried to gain different types of knowledge and skills from different avenues, and I've tried to pick up diverse skills before. In fact, all my undergraduate majors are very, very far away from economics or history or politics. Yeah, but I'm here. SkillsFuture is the latest initiative by the government to promote lifelong learning of people. So it focuses on providing training opportunities and training incentives to people. It places the main responsibility and main decision of learning on the learners. So the learners will have the responsibility and decision to decide when should I learn, what should I learn, how should I learn. So here are some examples of the different facades of initiative under the SkillsFuture umbrella. Then during the COVID-19 pandemic, more initiatives are added to this umbrella to help people survive their existing jobs or to go to new jobs. For SkillsFuture credit, if you know, I think many of you have spent it on BTEC, the government gives some funding support to Singaporeans to pay off bills for training. So here are some data on the take-up rate of SkillsFuture credit. So as you can see, for the first 5 years of operation of SkillsFuture credit, about 25% of the intended audience have used this credit. Is 25% of audience considered a good take-up rate? I let you think about it on your own. You should consider that 5 years is not a short period. And many people by right have gone through a job loss or job transformation in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This information here is just for additional enrichment to let you know that you shouldn't take numbers as it is. So last time the government will tell you a number based on new user, but the new type of report covers both new and repeat users. So when you see numbers now, you cannot just directly add into the table over here. Yeah. After 2019, the government gave out top-ups for SkillsFuture credit. So when you have top-ups, there will be more repeat users. And so now the numbers and calculations are quite different. SkillsFuture credit focuses a lot on providing courses and providing money. But it is necessary to think about what the government can do other than providing money and providing courses. Are there something else that can be done? We should also think about what the individual should do to improve themselves, not just rely on what the government does. Regardless of what initiatives are rolled out, this initiative will be futile, will be useless, if the mindsets of employers and employees do not change. The employees must have the correct mindset. They must be willing and constructive in attending training. They must be realistic in expectations of what they can get after training. The bosses should also have change in mindset. They must be receptive towards hiring people who are adequately trained, especially those in old age or those in career switch. So if people train themselves and they are adequately trained, but the bosses refuse to hire them, then what's the point? When you talk about the effectiveness of the initiative, we should also look at the efficiency of the initiative, meaning the resource management of the initiative. SkillsFuture Credit and other initiatives use up a lot of money. So the government may have to think of how to spend the money more efficiently with less wastage. This is especially so as we can see how some training providers have designed their courses and jack up cost prices to game the system. We have also seen how opportunities have cheated and create scams to make frauds and extract grant money. Yeah, so I think there are quite a number of headline news on cases with fraud cases related to SkillsFuture. So as for any other type of policies, SkillsFuture will always have challenges. It is natural, so it's how it should move on and improve further. In relation to the launch of SkillsFuture initiative, there are some public agencies having reorganization to fit their purposes more relevantly. So from then on, you have the creation of SkillsFuture Singapore that coordinates between pre-employment training and lifelong training. This is under MOE. It is a major change because you have one agency handling pre-employment training and lifelong training together. In the past, pre-employment training was under MOE and lifelong continual training was under MOM. So full-time degrees in public universities would be under MOE. Then part-time degrees in public and private institutions will be under MOM. So you will have less streamlining of standards and curriculum. Now with everything put under one roof, hopefully they can be managed more effectively in a consolidated manner. Then the Workforce Singapore was created to replace the old WDA. So there was no more WDA after this reorganization. Workforce Singapore focuses on coordinating between manpower supply and industry needs. So this agency helps to provide job services to workers as well as to help to create competitive industries for the bosses. Okay, so now we shall move on to another big topic for manpower, which is productivity. Singapore has been relatively low in productivity for many, many decades. Singapore is ranked quite low when it comes to productivity as compared to other countries. You can see that Singapore is quite effective, quite responsive, quite fast in action, but not that efficient or productive. When I talk about efficiency and productivity, we are talking about output per unit input. So when rubbish is cleared very fast in Singapore, when repairs are done very fast in Singapore, this speed is supported by this huge army of cleaning and maintenance crew on standby. It is not because each worker is being very well used. When work is done under a very tight deadline, it is usually because we do overtime or we get more help to help us. That will not provide more productivity. When you get more help, more input to do the same work, you are not being more productive. When you are doing overtime, you are also not being more productive because you are doing the same work using same effort or even more effort, just that your work is done after office hours. As I said just now, productivity and efficiency is related to output per unit input. When a country wants to increase GDP, there are two key ways. One way is to increase the amount of inputs like land, labor, and capital. And these inputs by right should be underutilized at that time. So for example, the country has spare or underutilized land, so the country use this land to set up offices and factories to create business activity and hence increase GDP. For example, the country has spare or underutilized labor. So the country uses this labor to create more output and hence increase GDP. This type of method is also called the factor-driven model. The other way is to increase productivity of existing inputs, meaning you make better use of existing inputs without increasing inputs. So let's say you already use 300 square kilometer of land for your factories and offices. You think of how to use this 300 square kilometers to do more things, to create more gain, without using more land. So similarly, you may have 1 million workers now working in the country. You will think how to make these 1 million workers create more output instead of adding more headcount. So this is considered a productivity-driven model. Traditionally, the government and bosses in Singapore relied very strongly on the factor-driven model. They relied on rapid accumulation of inputs to increase GDP rather than to increase efficiency. Whenever more work has to be done, the first thought is to add more headcount. So when you want to do more work, add more headcount. And this addition of headcount is at a very fast speed, not a slow speed. Factor-driven model is more suitable for developing countries in early stage because they have a lot of underutilized resources. However, the problem of Singapore now is that Singapore is a developed country and Singapore does not have underutilized labor in the first place. In fact, she is now highly reliant on external labor that she does not have. So this model is actually not so suitable for Singapore now, but the government and the bosses are still using it. The long-time, low-cost, low-skill labor model here, commonly adopted by Singapore, has caused inertia of firms when it comes to improving productivity. They are not so motivated, they are not so interested in increasing productivity. Therefore, the productivity always stay at quite a low level in Singapore. Many businesses, especially SME, incline to go for easier options and focus on daily survival. So if the fast, direct method of adding headcount can solve their manpower needs, and the option of adding headcount is not hard and expensive to execute, the companies would just choose this easier option. The ready supply of low-wage foreign manpower helps to build up this interest because it makes this model very easy to use. It is not so difficult to add headcount because of this ready supply. Actually, in the past, the bosses used local workers to handle this model, but after local workers become not so cheap anymore, now the bosses use the foreign workers to handle this model. It is unsustainable to rely on this method for growth and competitiveness. It discourages the country from better utilizing manpower resources, be it from local or foreign origins. The companies, the bosses would have the temptation to keep adding new headcount whenever more work needs to be done, rather than to improve productivity, improve technology use, improve product value, improve work processes through better manpower planning, through better IT adoption, through more creative innovations. As a matter of fact, this caused the lopsided attention on direct cost cutting upfront to maintain profit, instead of using the methods I said just now, which can actually provide more profit and higher profit and I think more sustainable kind of profit. So you can have more sustainable profit, you can have more amount of profit if you use this method. Because if you just think of cutting costs, you're not raising sales, you're not improving your product, you're just going day by day. So it will not be that constructive for the companies per se. Many companies in Singapore focus on direct cost cutting. So whenever they need to earn money, they will try to cut costs instead of increasing sales or improving product. And this leads to an unhealthy race to the bottom, meaning that the companies will try to undercut each other in price instead of doing things better. So if I want to earn business, I want to fight for business, I will try to charge cheaper. You charge $2, I charge $1.50, then he charge $1. We are trying to be cheaper than one another, instead of thinking of how to do things better to sell more things. Low productivity may eventually shrink marginal returns of firms and bring other adverse effects as shown over here. So if you are too low in productivity, even though the workers are cheap, ultimately you will have an increase in manpower costs because of the resultant overheads and complexity to manage that huge army of employers in your organization. It impedes the economy from seeking higher value add and higher technology sophistication. If all the companies are just focusing on the simple, low-cost, low-skill way of doing things, they will not think of how to use technology to improve productivity. They will not think of using innovation to improve work processes and their product value. When things are cheap, when workers are cheap, they will be low in skill. So there is a limit how much they can help you to advance your business. When your intuition is to add headcount, every time you need to do more work, then it will lead to a lot of human beings in Singapore, and hence you have a fast expanding population. With that fast expanding population, it brings along the infrastructure costs and pressure. The government has to invest to build more infrastructure to feed that fast expanding population. You have to spend more money for that. It shall stagnate wages for the lower income foreign and local labor. So the salary of the lower income people would lay flat or even drop. Why is this so? If I give an example, so for case of local manpower, lower income local manpower are usually older in age and lower in education. So when they look for jobs, the boss may say, take this low salary. You take it or leave it. If you don't take it, I will just get a cheaper foreign worker to replace. Most probably, they will take it because they are leading a hard life and they do not have much options as compared to other people. When it comes to lower income foreign labor, the boss may also say, here, this is the low salary, take it or leave it. Most of them will take it because they have a lot of burden at home, and many of them actually incur a lot of debt to work in Singapore. And because of this, you have local workers of lower income complaining about their poor livelihoods. You have lower income foreign workers being exploited by bosses, having poor living conditions, and having salaries withheld because the bosses want to save money. So it is doing no good for both local and foreign lower income workers. Productivity has not always been the top of the agenda of the Singapore government. So this is just some depiction for this statement. Normally, during the budget statements every year, the government would say what are the focus of the government, what the government is doing, where the money will be gone to, yeah. And if you tabulate how many times this word productivity appears, you can see that it only appears two times, two instances where you have a productivity drive. In other times, this aspect of productivity is not the priority and focus seems to be elsewhere. The government tried to have a productivity drive in the 1980s. Yeah. So it was meant to prevent heavy reliance on the economic formula of low wages and foreign labor from creating a vicious cycle. So these are the so-called objectives of this productivity drive. The government wants to restructure towards a more productive and mature economy. You want to kill off unproductive companies. You want to reduce reliance on low-skilled foreign manpower. And they've said that since independence, the PAP government has exercised wage restraint. So the government says that thank you for being so tolerant of the wage restraint for 10 years. Right now, I try to help you to raise your wages a bit more. In relation, there were several rounds of wage increases introduced during this period, and there were some limits imposed on work permits. However, this restructuring took a U-turn in 1985 because in 1985, Singapore experienced her first significant recession since independence, and the bosses, the companies, were complaining that the wage increases are eating into their profits. In order to counter the economic recession and to appease the bosses, the government made a U-turn of the policies, and these are the things introduced by the government instead. So you can see that the actions are as such. The government went back to the wage restraint model. The government switched its stance about having less reliance on low-skilled foreign manpower. Instead, the government pursued liberal import of foreign labor. Then the economy rebounded by 1988, so the government shifted the focus on something else, deemed of higher importance and benefit. After about 30 years later, in 2010, the government relaunched another productivity drive. In view of the serious issues surfacing in relation to low productivity and the past economic model. So here are some of the serious issues mentioned. I think we have said something about this before earlier on. There is rising global competition in terms of cost. So if Singapore wants to control manpower cost, productivity has to be the way to go. Then I mentioned just now, if the companies all focus on using the low skill, low cost way of doing business, it would impede the capability development in terms of technology and innovation of Singapore. Then Singapore cannot move up the value chain to become more sophisticated and mature. When you always add new headcount to get work done, you have a lot of humans in Singapore, and the rising population can cause a strain to the country. And when you have overpopulation, overcrowding, and increase in foreign manpower, there may be certain sentiments and expectations brewing in the local citizenry. It can also increase income and social inequality, as I said just now. If your lower income local and foreign workers are having stagnated wages, while the rich people are flying higher and higher, the gap between the rich and poor will get bigger and bigger. So as you can see, the original strategy of Singapore for many, many decades focused on adding headcount to gain growth. Now the government said, this is my goal. I want to focus more on productivity instead. This is a goal, but we are working towards it, but we are quite far from it. We are still working towards it, and we actually are quite a big distance away from the other global cities because they are more progressive when it comes to productivity. Challenges today are also largely a result of past decisions. So the government has always relied strongly on foreign MNCs and foreign manpower. The government has always relied strongly on controlling business costs through wage restraint and government incentives. So essentially, the government has chosen to have faster growth and lower hanging fruits instead of more measured growth with more sustainable productivity and immigration. That method may work in the past era due to the circumstances and considerations at that time, but something suitable for one era may not suit the other era, which is the current era, hence preferably some change can be done. Interestingly, when the government launched the productivity drive in 2010, the government set the target to increase productivity by 2 to 3% per year over the next 10 years. So over the next 10 years, every year I want to increase 2 to 3% in productivity. If you look at the graph later on at the next slide, you will see that overall productivity growth tended to go flat or low for most of that 10 years, despite policy efforts. Why is this so? I will not directly answer the question. Instead, I may want to draw your attention to what we have said about the policy cycle in lesson 7. So when we talk whether policy work or not, whether policy performs well or not, there can be various factors. So if you look at the policy cycle, you may look at whether there is wrong identification of the cause, whether you have unsuitable solution, whether there is flaw in implementation, whether you create unintended consequences, or whether the target is realistic or not. As for the cause or problem related to productivity, you can refer to what we have said just now and later on. Then if you zoom down into specific policy, then you can look at the policy and say, is this policy a good solution? Is it well implemented? Because this assessment will be on a policy by policy basis. Yeah. You can talk about root causes in general, but when you talk about design, implementation, etc., you have to look at specific policy. Although the overall productivity growth does not look very nice for Singapore for all the targeted years, but you have improvement in certain export-oriented sectors like finance and manufacturing. The export-oriented sectors are doing better in productivity because they serve the world. They know that if they don't buck up, they will die in the global competition. So they have more pressure and more awareness to improve productivity and to do something about it. In comparison, the local oriented sectors like F&B, retail, construction, transport, these sectors are still relying more on the old factor-driven model, relying on your low-cost, low-skill manpower kind of method. Yeah, so it sort of creates a dual economy in Singapore in terms of productivity, whereby you have this group of organizations doing quite okay for productivity, whereas this group of organizations doing not so good for productivity. So this is the charts to show some performance of Singapore productivity change over recent years. So if you take the dotted line here as the rough target of government, and the orange line is the overall productivity level change, you can see that the government say I want to have 2 to 3% every year, right? But most of the time, the orange line falls below the dotted line, which means that most of the time, this target is not achieved. And this is about percentage change. So if I convert this graph into absolute level, you can visualize, because as I said before, these two graphs represent the same thing in different way. So if this is the target, I want to increase 2 to 3% every year, you can see that the actual productivity level is like that for Singapore. When you have big changes, big falls or big rises in productivity, it is more due to economic recessions or economic upturns rather than policy effort on productivity. So you can see that normally during recession, you will have a big drop, then when you have recovery, you got a big rise. When productivity drop during economic recession, it is not because the workers are more lazy. It is because the company is having less orders. You have recession, so you have less orders. Usually the worker may produce 3 cartons of goods a day, but now the worker is creating 1 carton of goods a day. Not because the worker does not want to work, it is because there are no orders. Then when you have economic boom, you see a big increase in productivity. It's not because the workers are becoming more hardworking. It's just because the orders are coming back. Yeah. Besides, base effect also comes into play when we read the data. We have talked about base effect before, and I have said before that when you have the first year of recovery from some bad times, you will always see a sharp increase. So the sharp increase is due to base effect more than anything else. So if you see 2010 and you see that there's a big increase here, you cannot just conclude that, well, Singapore productivity has grown impressively in 2010. If you look at 2010 in absolute number, Singapore only returned to her usual productivity level. So there is no increase, it's just going back to the usual. Now, let us talk about other aspects that allows us to see the topic of productivity in more perspective. Productivity means more than having automation, technology, and manpower skill set. So it does not mean that, oh, once I have a lot of technology installed, or once my manpower is very skilled, we have better productivity. It may not be the case because there are other things that come into play. Technology is only an enabler to implement a solution. For technology to work for you, you need to first understand your problems, your needs, your processes, and then create a suitable solution in order for the technology tool to be applied to this solution. So you cannot just expect to install some software on machine and think that productivity will increase if you do not know what you are supposed to solve and what your weakness is. Besides, productivity will not increase if you have poor business models, poor work processes, poor job scopes. It will not increase if bosses and workers do not have the proper mindset towards work, ownership, experimentation, and innovation. It will not work if the bosses redesign jobs for greater productivity, but no one is taking up the jobs. The core problem about productivity in Singapore now is not about worker origins. The problem is not about whether the workers come from Singapore or overseas. The problem is how the government and bosses have been using this old, outdated, factor-driven model for decades and decades. use of citizens may not be necessarily more productive than use of foreigners. The crux is how you use human beings, not the passport held by the human beings. So we want to strive to have more efficiency with lower labor quantity, meaning how to do same work with less headcount or more work with same headcount, regardless of local origins. You can hire for locals, you can hire foreigners, by all means. But how do you best use this human being? That is the crux of the problem. Besides, you cannot always blame manpower costs when you have high business costs. As you know, in Singapore, real estate and rental costs are very expensive. They are also a major contributor towards business costs. During certain times, rental rates, real estate rates can increase by 30%, 50%, or 100%. How often can we see our salary increase by 50% to 100%? So rental rates are more scary at times, like what we see now. So like now, many companies are having problems because of their rental rates, the property rates. Even it's not just about rental rates and property rates, it's also the housing costs for their workers. So some companies are actually moving their foreign talent out of Singapore because the foreign talent cannot tahan the housing rental anymore. Yeah. So this is like one example here. Although real estate and rental costs are a major component in business costs, but the government tends to keep a distance from it. The government does not intervene too much on this aspect in hope to maintain a free market. Higher productivity is not to cause more employment. It is about how to make better use of the limited manpower resources at hand. So if a cafe uses one less barista because of better productivity, this barista can move to a hair salon that requires one more hairstylist. So you cannot say that, oh, this better productivity in a cafe is causing job loss. But you should see it as this additional headcount being released and transferred to another company that needs manpower more. The challenge is how to do it, how to divert the labor save to other places. It is not so easy. It requires compatibility of skills, whether that barista can have enough skills to be a hairstylist. It requires receptivity of various stakeholders. So that barista must be willing to get trained to be a hairstylist. The hair salon boss must be willing to hire this person. The hair salon customers must be willing to let this person to cut the hair. So everyone must play a part in order for this mechanism to work. Please take note that productivity and production are two different notions. So do not get mixed up. Productivity is a relative number, relative value, output per unit input. Production is about absolute output. So it is possible to have high production and low productivity at the same time. Many of you always write words wrongly in your exam. Yeah. Okay, so there are some two camps of people in Singapore. One camp says that we should pause or slow down the pace of productivity drive because it's getting too aggressive, it's very tiring. Then there is another camp having an opposite view. Those with the view of pausing or slowing down productivity drive are people with these circumstances. So some bosses have this optimism that I can actually improve productivity very quickly later by installing some technology, so please do not bother me now. And there are some bosses who have difficulty getting use of the new way of doing things, and they are having problem in getting manpower with the foreign labor being restricted by certain criteria, with local labor being not so interested to take up the redesigned jobs. And the bosses themselves may lack enough skills and knowledge to increase productivity. The government tends to use rules and incentives to promote productivity. However, the use of rules and incentives is limited in impact if the bosses do not know how to do it in the first place. Then due to the not so good economic environment during the past number of years, the bosses or companies may struggle to stay afloat, so they have less bandwidth or less interest to think of other things like improving productivity. Then for those people who say that we should continue, they are on the view that we are already behind schedule. The limits of growth has been reached. It is too late if we delay restructuring any further. There is an urgency to persevere on no matter how hard it is. Interestingly, COVID-19 pandemic may be a promoter towards productivity and an obstacle towards productivity. Many companies are struggling due to the pandemic, so they may not have the resources and capabilities to think and plan productivity. So in this case, the pandemic is an obstacle. However, due to the pandemic, many companies are forced to change their work arrangement due to all the manpower shortages and safe distancing measures. After that, they realized that actually we can do the same amount of work with less people. Actually, technology adoption is not that scary. Actually, a lot of steps used last time are quite stupid and useless and can be removed. And because of this, they change their ways, and it can help to improve productivity by a lot. So in this view, it can see that the pandemic is a promoter towards productivity drive. Okay. The next topic is about technology change. As you know, technology is transforming how work is done in the world, including Singapore. You have more types of technology coming in, and there is this survey and study to say that about 60% of the jobs would have at least 30% of their activities automatable. Technology is a key change agent to economic and job landscape. Globalization is the other one. So with technology advances, you have certain jobs being removed, you have certain jobs being created. Jobs being of higher risk, jobs that are more repetitive in nature, jobs that are higher risk are jobs that can be replaced by self-service or online platforms, etc. Jobs of a lower risk of removal are those that involve creativity, strategy, interaction, personal touch, and delicate effort. Manual and abstract jobs are expected to survive, but not routine jobs, as I said just now. Just to take note, manual jobs may involve high skill, not necessarily low skill. So dentists are high skilled people using the hands to do very delicate job. So manual jobs are not necessarily low skill all the time, so it includes high skilled one as well. The use of technology, especially automation, is making low skill and mid skill jobs obsolete or reducing their demand and wage growth. This is of concern, especially in Singapore, because many of the Singaporeans are under this category of mid skill jobs. In Singapore, the higher level, higher skilled jobs are often taken up by foreigners. The lower end, the lower skilled jobs are often taken by foreigners. So many of the Singaporeans are somewhere in between. And if the mixed skilled jobs are gone due to the automation, even though you have quite decent amount of skills and certification, you can also get obsolete. Yeah, so this is something that we have to be mindful about. In particular, technology change can cause job polarization. Polarization means separated by two extreme ends. So job polarization means that jobs are concentrated at two extreme ends, with not many jobs in the middle range. Why this polarization may come about, there's some points mentioned here. So on one hand, you have people fitting to the new trends and new skills, enjoying very high wages and very high prospects. So they are given a skill premium. They are paid high premium. So they are out there earning a lot, and they're earning more and more and more. Then on the other hand, you have people with sunset jobs or lower value added or lower skill jobs facing stagnation in career and wage, or even unemployment. When you have low prospects, it may not necessarily mean that you are low skill. It can mean that your jobs are obsolete or outdated or transferred to somewhere else. So you have more people here. Then in the middle, the jobs are more routine-based that can be replaced by automation. So with that, more and more of these jobs are going off. So you have more people on this end and more people on this end and less people in the center. So you're causing this situation whereby jobs are concentrating more at the top or at the bottom, and hence you have this polarization. This is one of the contributors to widening inequality as well. Because you have people earning either a lot or very little, and not much people in between. So the gap between the rich and poor is getting more and more prominent. Rapid technology changes are causing difficulties in setting course of action for governments and people at large. So it is harder for governments and bosses and individuals to predict the direction of change. Even you can predict there is lesser time for you to prepare for the change. So it is necessary to regard learning and exploration as a continuous process, and it is necessary to get prepared for multiple changes of career tracks. Changes of career tracks is different from changes of jobs. Singaporeans change a lot of jobs, but I mean change of track. So maybe now you are an engineer, later on you become a social worker, or you become a baker, something like that. You change the track totally. Gone are the days whereby someone will just fixate on the track, get a certificate, get a job, get salary increment, get a promotion, and then we each reach the end point and we can rest and relax. Now it's not the case. We may have to face a number of changes in career tracks. And even if you stay on to the same job forever, the nature of your job will likely change, and hence you also have to adjust accordingly. Change is tiring and uncomfortable. It is human nature to stay in the comfort zone. I have heard from both young workers and old workers saying that do not let me do this, it's not my job, do not let me do this, I've never done before, even though guidance will be offered. If you say this type of things too often to your bosses, the bosses may decide to pack your bags and you do not need to do anything whatever. Yeah. So I think there is a need to fit yourself to the circumstances and learn more new things. When we say change, it applies to both the workers and the bosses. So the workers have to learn more skills, to pick up new tasks. The bosses also have to change work processes, change job scopes to fit the new workers. Since you will not know what opportunities may come in future and you do not know when they will come, it is more useful to learn and develop capabilities progressively, continuously, instead of just picking up something when a trend comes. Many people treat that technology is an enemy or competitor because they are taking away the jobs of people. But we should see it as a symbiotic relation whereby we can leverage on technology to gain from the benefits. But on the other hand, we should bolster our relevance to sustain value of humans. If these are the strengths of humans, then we must really make sure that we are good in this. Otherwise, we are really likely to be replaced by technology instead. COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the rate of adoption of technology. So because of these issues and effects, this chart is just trying to show which areas have more acceleration in technology adoption. In the past, people or companies may delay or procrastinate in technology adoption for whatever reasons. But when the pandemic came, they had no choice, they are forced to do so. So when you need to do something, when you want to do something, you will do something. Okay, with that, we can take a short break. We will come back around 8 o'clock.